All right, let's get into this because we hear this, you've heard this. How many times have we heard that as educators, as even students? And we want to talk about that because we're talking about, the disposition we have and students have towards math, and how we can shape that disposition, and talk about that from the classroom level, but also system level, and thinking about those things. We're going to talk about a story from a team that's trying to make this shift and make this improvement. But let's get into it. Before we do want to remind you that we have a new addition to the podcast. Beth Curran is here. She's joining us. We got the panel here together. Yvette's here, Kyle's here, I'm here, Beth's here. Let's get into it. Yvette, set the stage. What's the story here?
I was meeting with the school recently, and they're working on school improvement planning around math, and this is actually a high achieving school. Their state results indicate significant growth, and they're pretty happy with their achievement levels. They use NWA as their benchmarking, and the initial benchmark is showing good improvement. And so then I said to them, well, where's the opportunity then? It sounds like everything's going great.
Yeah, what's
Tell
the
me
problem
about,
here?
but there's always opportunity. There's always opportunity. And the department said, some days I just wish I didn't teach the subject everybody hates.
Oh,
And I was like, tell me more about that.
yeah,
Of course, tell me more. And he's like, I just, even though our students tend to do well and we're very proud of our achievement data, students still openly say they don't want to be there. They hate math class. They don't see themselves as a math learner.
right.
And I feel like that's a problem worth tackling.
Totally. Like, I was just going to say, it's like, in a way, that what they've just told you is that, yeah, like we've got, like, there's this benchmark we're trying to hit on around student data and student achievement, but it's like, but there's this other benchmark here that we wish was better, but we don't know what to do there. But it's like you're measuring yourself against these two zones, and sometimes we just don't even think about how to affect the one zone versus the other. The achievement goal is like the be all end all, where it sounds like this team's like, we realize that maybe we've missed the mark. Like, maybe, like, is it just as good to have this achievement data when everyone hates it, or do we need to have like this other goal around like student disposition towards the subject is equally important? There's that balance there, and this team's like, I think we've like we should either refocus there or make it a similar priority.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I remember supporting another school, an elementary school, who had a similar problem in that they were high achieving. Standardized test scores suggested that they were on a good trajectory. But when they asked their female students if they liked math and they felt they were good at math, over 50% of them said no.
Oh,
And so this is an indicator of whether or not students are going to continue in math at higher levels, if they're going to
for
go
sure.
on to post-secondary education that involves math as a content area. And so disposition is important, I believe. And so with this team, the question that we essentially asked was, first of all, what data do you have to suggest, apart from anecdotal, that students dislike math?
Right.
I think it was a feeling that they had a
Right.
feeling based on, the body language and overhearing students talk about it. But what data do we have to suggest that students do have a, negative disposition towards the subject? And then ultimately, what are we willing to change to
Right.
shift that?
Willing.
If we do have the data, if we do collect the data or spend the time to get to the bottom and really understand where there's some challenges here with the disposition of students, keeping it productive, the question then becomes what are we going to do? Are we willing to do the work and put the effort in order to try to get to the bottom of it? And I think at its core, I think we all want to, but the real question
Right.
is, are we willing to? Able, I would say we are always able, but sometimes we say we are not due to some time circumstances. But that's going to be a big important factor here if we want to actually take this information, what we think anecdotally is taking place, is get the real data and then use that to try to figure out what is our next step in
Yeah.
order to make a dent in this.
Yeah, when you think about it, what you're saying is that we need, at the school level, at the the district level, whatever our system level is, we need to continually remind ourselves that if we're seeing issues that we want change in, then we need to think about the inquiry process. Like, we need to think about what Yvette's saying and what you're saying, Kyle, is like, what data to suggest that we have a problem? What are the steps that we could take to solve the problem? And how are we going to know we solved the problem? And do we have the tools, the necessary conditions to solve that problem? And then let's go ahead and do it. Like, I think most times it's like we know these things are there, but we're not going through that process. We're not taking that systematized approach to address some of the issues we know are present, because, I don't know, it's someone else's job, or, you know, like, this is just math. That's just the way it's supposed to be. And I think what this team is doing, and what they are strategizing now to do, is to take that approach, but then also, like I was saying before, put on the same level of indicators of success that I have achievement, student achievement in terms of scores as one indicator of success, but we now need to raise up. What are some other quantitative or qualitative indicators that we also want to hold true? Because sometimes, like, even though we're talking about like student disposition, this is also the same type of reasoning when we talk about buy-in from educators, is to think about, like, because you hear this too at certain levels of education, that is like, I've been trying to do this. I've been trying to shift mindsets around teachers' belief and teachers' disposition towards the subject around mathematics, because I want them to be lifelong learners and they want them to go down this pathway. But where are we putting the emphasis? Like, are we still saying achievement is the be all end all? Or are we creating other qualitative measures to say that, yeah, we're doing okay here, but we're getting killed over here, guys. Like, we got to put something into place to bring this up. And that can help, like, that refocusing of goals can help change some of the disposition for our educators as well, because now we have like a reason to go down this pathway. We now have to, like, this is something we're all striving to go down, and it's really important for our school to do that work. So when you think about that, that can help shift some of these beliefs at the educator level. But it's kind of big thinking right here. Let's get more specific. Like, what can we be doing to do some of this inquiry approach?
I wanted to share a tangible example, and this is one that I experienced as a teacher. So I was part of a district-wide initiative to unpack student experience in the math classroom. And I remember we had some researchers come in from the district level, and they pulled a panel, random sampling of students from my class. And I remember this vividly, going into the LST office, and there were 5 students from my class, and I was there with them. But it was these, unbiased researchers who were asking them questions about their math experience, what they did and what was the purpose of it and how they feel. And I thought I knew my students. I pride myself on really knowing my students. And I'm going to tell you, I was shocked by their responses. And it really made me realize that I had never asked them.
Yeah.
I taught the way that I thought was best for them.
We do that so much.
Right.
And I assumed, and some of these were some of my, most engaged, highest achieving students. And to hear their perception of their class experience shook me.
Right.
It was a transformative. I can literally picture the faces of the children in this room, what was on the walls that day. And this was probably 8 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, it's so interesting. A lot of times when we are taking anecdotal, experiential situations and trying to compute what that actually means, when a student's doing their work, they're doing well, they're polite, right? So being polite to you and liking or enjoying math class are actually very different. So they may have liked me as a person, and I interpret that as they enjoy math class, when in reality, they might be like, I enjoy having you as a teacher because you're a good person, or the way you speak to me, or the way you, build me up, or whatever it might be. But mathematics, I'm just going through the motions. And it kind of brings me back. I know, Beth, in the last episode, you had shared your math moment, and, it was comforting to you. You could show up in math class and just fine. And I think a lot of people have that experience. I was one of those people as well. I went to school. I didn't go home and excited to do my math homework. Right. It was like I did what I had to do. I was confident. And a lot of students in our classes are exactly like this. And even though they aren't disruptive, or even though they aren't, voicing these challenges or concerns, we make these assumptions and assume that everything's a-okay, when in reality, if we ask them, maybe there's an opportunity for us to actually dig in on what's missing for them and what we might be able to do to actually enhance that experience. And imagine the student's already doing well in a math class, and then they actually enjoy the process at the same time. Like, think of, how the doors can open for them in terms of what that might mean for them, just in terms of enjoying it, but then also in terms of what that could lead to from a career path perspective.
Yeah, I have a story to share too about that, Kyle, because I, similarly to Yvette, thought that I was doing the best that I could in class, teaching my students math the way that I was taught. And then I started sort of branching out and trying different things, creating more exploration type activities for students. So less of me telling them what to do and having them model that, but more of them just kind of digging in and building on their prior knowledge and attempting things and persevering through problems on their own. And I specifically remember this one lesson. I had been sort of playing around with this idea of, I'm going to let them work with a partner. I'm going to let them try to figure this out. We're going to consolidate together. We're going to have lots of manipulatives and things that they can use to draw to enter into the mathematics. And at the end of a lesson, this fourth grade student, a girl, came up to me and she said, "Miss Curran, I loved today's lesson. Can we do more of our lessons like that?" And it was, so I think my point is that, that was straight out of her mouth. She was a great student. She was, I would have said that she absolutely loved math class every day, but it was interesting to hear her reflect on that in that moment. But I think what that says to us as educators is we have to be willing to try different things in class. We have to be really willing to try different ways of instruction to see what does resonate with our students. Because until, I don't think the student would have never said, "Miss Curran, I don't like math class." But once I tried shifting my instruction in a different way, she came up to me on her own, not prompted, and just said how much she loved math class today.
And imagine how many other students along the way, whether it's a positive response or whether it's maybe something, I think a lot of times, like, we don't ask because we assume, but then we're also a little scared too, right? Like, I mean,
Sure.
Sometimes when you get that feedback, especially if you aren't exactly sure how to fix it, that can feel very defeating. But at the same time, if we're not willing to ask, then we're kind of hoping that a student like the student you had experienced there is going to come and actually share that experience with you. Right. So obviously they felt strong enough that there was a big enough difference that it was worth sharing because they wanted to engage in more of that. And you just wonder how many other students are thinking, or what are they thinking when we engage in mathematics the way we sort of, quote unquote, always have.
Yeah. And
this made me think about, go ahead.
I was going to say that I think that it also makes me think that, at what point does math become not as enjoyable, right? Because if you ask kindergarten teachers, do your students enjoy math class? They'll say yes. First grade, sure. Second grade, yeah. It's usually about third grade. And so I would ask teachers to really reflect on, what is the change in instruction starting in about third grade? And what is it that shifts in our instruction that then makes math class less joyful? Is it manipulatives? Is it communication? Is it games? Is it the focus on memorization that kind of comes up in third grade? That all of a sudden now students aren't enjoying what they do in math class as much. And so, I think there's a lot to be said and a lot that we can learn from looking at math across all grade levels.
We talked about, if we're going to ask students some of those questions, Beth, that you just shared, the teacher has to be willing to respond.
Mm-hmm.
But now I want to talk to the leadership, because I want to ask, do they have the freedom and the opportunity to respond? And this goes back to, we had a conversation recently on the episode about implementation with fidelity versus implementation with integrity. And so sometimes, when we talk to teachers, they say, I would love to create experiences that are more joyful. I would love to be more responsive, but my district is telling me I have to be lockstep. I have to teach it exactly this way. I don't have the autonomy or the creativity to adjust anything. And so that's where I need to talk to leaders now and say, if you're going to ask the questions of students and you're going to want your teachers to be responsive, are we creating a system that allows us to still remain integrous to the curriculum while also being responsive to the student learning needs and their disposition towards the learning environment?
Yeah, like you're bringing up a huge part, because I think the idea of, this is why we get into the pacing guide and follow this and follow that, is like we haven't built the system around the decision-making frameworks that we want teachers to take, right? It's like, if you trusted your teacher to make appropriate instructional decisions based off students, then you wouldn't try to prescribe everything. You want to be able to like say, like, here's the big picture. Here are, say, our core values. Here's where we're trying to go. And do we understand, like, have we communicated that? And when all of a sudden you start to communicate those things, then it's all of a sudden teachers you can feel the trust come back together to make these appropriate instructional decisions for students. And I think that kind of goes away. Yvette, talk to us about this team. Like, what did this team do? Because if like this was their goal, this was their next step, is like, we realize there's an issue here. What are we now going to do about it?
Well, what I will share is that this group is early in the stages, right? They're essentially they've identified the pebble, or the where's their room for opportunity. Okay. But what was exciting is that as we left that call, there was an enthusiasm to go out and seek some answers. They wanted to position students at the center of the decision-making process. They didn't want to make assumptions about what was going to improve the student disposition without going to the students and asking them first. And of course, this is also high school. Students want to have a voice in their education. They want to be seen. They want to feel valued. And so how can they, as a department, create the opportunities to position students as partners in learning so that they are creating a classroom environment that is responsive to their learning needs and helps them see themselves as more capable and confident in the math class? So what I loved about this conversation with the school was that, one, the principal was there in the meeting and fully supportive of this work and was willing to create space for this work to happen. So right away, there was conversations about logistics, who's going to create. So when can the department come together to co-construct the interview questions? Where is the time for them to, how are we going to select students to sit on this interview panel? And where is that going to take place? And when is that going to take place? And so the principal, because they were so supportive of this work, was also willing to create the space and create the structures that this team would require to get this work in motion and to make sure that students were really feeling centered if they were going to be making decisions about how to shift instructional practices to improve student disposition.
What I think I really admire about this team specifically is that they're taking that steps on their flywheel approach, because it's like one of the important parts of the flywheel is understanding the support structures that they have access to and who plays key roles in that support structures. So the fact that you're saying, like, the principal is at the table, the principal's being a skilled facilitator, they're making use of their content specialist, and there's a team aspect approach to, say, going down this roadmap of this inquiry process. I think that, like, one of the indicators that we look at when we support teams is, do we have that supportive team in place? And if not, how do we put them in place? And how do we kind of create the rallying call to bring those people to that table? Because we know that without the right pressure and support, that change doesn't happen. And that this team is looking to create change, and they're bringing the people together to help create that change. They're monitoring the change. They're defining the change that you're trying to create, and they're going to capture the evidence to say, do we have to make a change? And if so, what are we going to be doing next to create that change, and how will we know we made that change? Like that right there, like what I love about this is, like, yes, they're addressing this one particular issue, but because they're making their system, because they're starting to put the system in place of, like, how we make decisions and going to Gemba. We've used that phrase here before, which is like getting right to it, getting to see the work, getting into the classroom, hearing from the students. Then I feel like this team is going to be strong because they're putting the right habits in place. Like I heard James Clear speak, and he said, James Clear is the author of Atomic Habits, and he said basically it's like goals are for like people who are concerned about winning one time. Systems are for people who are about winning consistently. And I think what I'm seeing here is that this team is like, they're going to be winning consistently because they're taking the right actions to create their flywheel approach. And that's an important move here that they're taking. Love seeing that when we work with teams.
Well, and I think an important aspect here as well is that, when you're doing this type of work, when let's say student achievement is at a reasonable or, at a strong level, imagine what this can do for a class, a school, a district where maybe student achievement isn't where you want to see it at, right? So think about how can we start with getting students to enjoy the process, getting them involved, getting them to invest in the process, and build a huge system around that. So let's continue this work, friends. Reach out to us anytime by booking a discovery call over with us at makemathmoments.com/district. We have resources for you to check out and all kinds of things to help you get started. And of course, we'd love to have a conversation with you about your school, district, or team.